Arden Summers will never forget the time as a 14-year-old, and at the direction of her father, sitting behind the wheel of a minivan with 3 of her 4 younger siblings as she drove into the darkness in March 2017. Earlier that day, Arden had helped her father, Trevor Summers, enter the Valrico, Florida, home of his estranged wife, Alisa Mathewson, where he was not allowed. Arden had left a window open so he could enter the home. Trevor had convinced Arden he needed her help so he could talk to Alisa about getting back together. But what Arden didn't know is that his plans were far more sinister. Trevor's attempt to reconcile turned out to be a 55-hour ordeal for Alisa. Arden, now 20 years old, said the guilt of playing a role in what happened to her mother, even though at the time she did not realize she was being manipulated, has weighed heavily on her for years. I've had so many issues with trusting people after what happened, and just the guilt that I lived with for so long before I finally told myself that this isn't my fault, Arden told 48 Hours correspondent Peter Van Sant in an interview for Alisa Mathewson's Night Terrors. In early 2017, Alisa and Trevor's marriage had deteriorated and both had filed restraining orders against one another. Alisa had moved to a place of her own, and they were sharing custody of their 5 children. Arden, the eldest, didn't want her family to fall apart. I was really hoping that, my family would be back together and healthy and fixed, Arden said. Arden said back then she admired her father and had a great relationship with him. We would go out on little dates together, go out for dinners, just him and I, or grocery shopping, she said. When Trevor asked her to help him in his mission to get Alisa back, she didn't think twice. Trevor enlisted Arden and Landon, her 12-year-old brother, to help him reunite with their mother. The plan was for Arden to go to Alisa's home with 2 of her siblings, 7-year-old Bryn and 5-year-old Grady. Once they all went to sleep, Arden would let Trevor know and he would come in through a window she'd leave open for him. At around 1 a.m. on March 11, 2017, Arden told her father the coast was clear and left the house through the same window Trevor climbed into minutes later. Arden joined Landon, who was sitting in Trevor's car down the street. Arden hoped that by the end of her parents' conversation, everyone would come out and they would all drive together back to the home they used to share as a family, and where her 3-year-old brother Cooper was left sleeping alone. As Arden and Landon waited in the car, Trevor turned Alisa into a hostage, tying her up with different objects around the house, including Christmas lights and a vacuum cord, and putting a sock in her mouth to stop her from screaming. He dragged Alisa out of her bedroom, where she was sleeping with Bryn and Grady, and began tormenting her. At around 5 a.m., Trevor asked Arden to come inside and get her young siblings, but when she walked into the house, she didn't notice anything was off. She believed her parents were talking things out, and assumed the conversation was taking longer than expected. Trevor then asked Arden to drive her 3 siblings back to his house, even though her only prior driving experience was in a parking lot for 20 minutes. This was very scary to have 3 kids in a car with me at the age of 14. Driving 30 minutes, Arden told 48 Hours. When asked if she thought it was irresponsible of her father to ask her to drive, she responded, "I was too concerned about Cooper waking up and finding nobody home to actually really worry about it. I wanted to do whatever I could to get to Cooper." Arden and her siblings made it to their father's home without incident and found Cooper was just waking up. Meanwhile, Alisa's nightmare was just beginning. Over the course of the next 55 hours, Trevor placed Alisa into her own vehicle and sexually assaulted her. On 2 occasions he tried to kill her, once trying to suffocate her with a pillow, and another time by strangling her with a rope. At his trial in August 2022, he was found guilty of kidnapping, 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of sexual battery, 4 counts of child neglect, grand theft auto, and violating a restraining order. During Summer's sentencing, Arden read her victim impact statement. She told Judge Christopher Sabella that she felt guilty for what her father had done to her mother and resented him for betraying her trust by making her believe he was trying to reunite their family. But with his sentencing came closure. "Now I stand here today stronger than I was before, ready for the sickening chapter to end. I am ready for the end, for the peace of mind. I may no longer be a child, but I can allow my inner child to heal. before sentencing Summers to 3 life sentences followed by another 224 years in prison. The judge told Arden, "You should not feel guilty for anything that you did in this case. I assure you of that." Summers was not allowed in Mathewson's home or anywhere near her. But that day, in March 2017, he manipulated his 14-year-old daughter to get into that house and commit a crime. Sometime around 1 a.m. on March 11, 2017, Trevor Summers, with Arden's help, climbed into his estranged wife's home through a window the 14-year-old left open for him. Arden reportedly left the house through the same window Summers climbed into minutes later. The teen then joined Landon, who was sitting in their father's car down the street. As the 2 children waited in the car, Summers turned Mathewson into a hostage and tied her up with objects found in the house, including Christmas lights and a vacuum cord. He even put a sock in her mouth to shush her screams and dragged her out of the bedroom, where their 2 sons Bryn and Grady were sleeping, and began tormenting her. Summers then asked Arden to take her younger siblings out of the house, but the 14-year-old failed to realize that anything was off. The father then asked his eldest to drive home with the siblings while he continued to torture his estranged for 55 long hours. He allegedly placed Mathewson in her own car, *Zuli assaulting her, and nearly killing her twice, once trying to suffocate her with a pillow, and another time by strangling her with a rope. The captor was arrested and the mother of 5 was rescued when authorities spotted their vehicle. What happened to Trevor Summers, and where is Alisa Mathewson now? Trevor Summers was found guilty of kidnapping, 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of sexual battery, 4 counts of child neglect, grand theft auto, and violating a restraining order in an August 2022 trial. He was handed 3 life sentences along with an additional 224 years in prison. According to reports, Alisa Mathewson has since divorced Summers and now resides in Tampa with all 5 children. Her estranged husband Trevor had entered her home in Valrico, Florida, dripping water on her head and was standing over her. "Alisa Mathewson, I'm still screaming," and he says, "Calm down, it's just me." I just start in full panic throwing things from my end table at him, and he grabbed my ankles and pulled me off the end of the bed. Peter Van Sant. This must be terrifying. Alisa Mathewson. It's terrifying. Bryn and Grady are running out of my room screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, don't kill Mommy." But how did it come to this? The couple first met in 1995 in high school in suburban Philadelphia and started dating 3 years later. The couple married in 2001, eager to begin their life together. Alisa Mathewson. He wanted to start a family right away. When I had Arden, it was everything I envisioned for my life. I envisioned myself being a stay-at-home mom. Peter Van Sant. And then over the years it was Arden times 5. You had 5 kids, right? Alisa Mathewson. Laughs. Yes, Alisa Mathewson. The more kids, it seemed that the more love, the more happiness. I wanted to have this picture-perfect life. Alisa says Trevor initially started a landscape and pool design company, and he dabbled in real estate. But he really fancied himself as an entrepreneur. Alisa Mathewson, he would open up businesses for a little while and then he would move on to a new business. The family moved several times, says Alisa, as Trevor chased opportunities. From Pennsylvania to Florida, to Vegas, to California, and eventually back to the Sunshine State, where the children were homeschooled. Arden Summers, we would very often host people, have sleepovers, friends over birthday parties, all kinds of stuff. Arden, now 20, remembers good times. Arden Summers, we would go the beach. We had a beach fairly close to our house. Play video games as a family and board games, stuff like that. Arden says while she was close to her mother, she had a special bond with her father. Arden Summers. I was definitely the definition of a daddy's girl. We would go out on little dates together, go out for dinners, just him and I. Meanwhile, Alisa says her relationship with Trevor was changing. With each move and birth of another child, she says her husband was slowly taking control of her life. Alisa Mathewson. I had to wear what he would select. I couldn't have men on my Facebook page. She couldn't even sit next to a man in church or anywhere. Alisa Mathewson. I couldn't ride in a car alone with a man. I was to have no communication with any men other than Trevor. Alisa was also overhearing snippets of Trevor's business conversations. Alisa Mathewson. There were some things that just weren't adding up. Alisa says Trevor was frequently in financial trouble, not paying debts and bouncing checks. He was arrested several times. But she says he always blamed his problems on others and the crisis would seem to pass. Alisa Mathewson. Every single time it would happen, it would be, "It's a misunderstanding." Peter Van Sant. He's having these incidents with the law. What are you thinking? Alisa Mathewson. Yeah, at the same time I was walking on eggshells. Don't question him, okay? And smile and nod. Peter Van Sant. Did he have a temper? In 2016, Alisa finally had enough and asked for a divorce. Trevor begged her to stay, wanting to keep the family together. Alisa agreed, but, she says, Trevor's possessive behavior worsened. Alisa Mathewson. He took my cell phone. He took my car. I was being held in my own home, as like a prisoner. It became very apparent that this is domestic violence. This is domestic abuse. I need to start working on my plan. She wanted to escape, but Trevor Summers had his own plans for Alisa. By October 2016, Alisa says she felt like an inmate in her own home, with her husband Trevor monitoring her every move. Alisa Mathewson. He was always with me for several weeks, until one day Trevor finally left to go to work. That's when Alisa called a domestic violence organization. Alisa Summers. And I said, these are the things that have been going on. My husband hadn't gone to work in weeks. This is the first time I've been alone. And the more and more I asked them, and I talked to them about this, they said, your situation is very serious. But before Alisa could get out of the house that day, Trevor burst through the door. Alisa Mathewson. He came in and he attacked me, and every time I would try to get away from him, he'd block me from leaving. Alisa says that after some time, Trevor reluctantly agreed to let her leave with the children. She sought refuge in the home of a friend. Alisa Mathewson. He was going crazy over this, and he found out where I was, and he would be showing up there. After a week there, she felt safer moving with her children to a shelter for abused women, leaving everything behind. Alisa Mathewson. We had nothing. We had the clothes on our backs. Alisa Mathewson. When I got out of the shelter, I got myself a home and a car and a job as well. She filed for divorce and even tried online dating. But Trevor was not out of her life, as they shared custody of the children. Alisa Mathewson. I was forced to see him twice a week to exchange children with him. By January 2017, Alisa says Trevor seemed resigned to the fact their marriage was over. And about a month later, Alisa she says she agreed to go by Trevor's home to sign the divorce papers. Peter Van Sant. So, you're in the house. What happens? Peter Van Sant. And he's got this machete right under Alisa Mathewson, right at my neck. And he says, I won't tie you up if you just stay still and listen to me. And then he held me there for a few hours. Eventually, Alisa says Trevor agreed to let her go, after she calmed him down and promised not to call the police. Promise she did not keep. Alisa Mathewson. I immediately called 911 when I left his home. But when investigators interviewed Trevor, he denied threatening Alisa's life. Alisa Mathewson. The police didn't believe me. I wasn't left with any marks. There was no evidence of what I was saying. Sergeant Christopher Steele. The sheriff's office treated it as a concern from the beginning. Hillsborough County Sheriff's Sergeant Christopher Steele was not involved in responding to the 911 call, but says investigators were looking into the case. Sergeant Christopher Steele. It's not like we could have simply arrested him that day based on the statements of just the two that were involved. We needed more. Both Alisa and Trevor filed for restraining orders against each other. And Alisa says Trevor used the incident to turn their children against her. Alisa Mathewson. He told the children I lied to the police. She is trying to get me thrown in prison. He told them their mother was responsible for the marriage falling apart. Arden Summers. He would constantly talk about how she was supposedly cheating on him. He, acted so heartbroken. Peter Van Sant. What did you think of your mother? Arden Summers. I felt like she was awful. Alisa Mathewson. There was graffiti all over the walls. There was Kool-Aid poured on my bed. Arden Summers. The Kool-Aid was his idea. The chalk and writing on the walls was my idea. Peter Van Sant. What had you written on the walls? Arden Mathewson. I had written things like, traitor. I wrote, thanks for being an ass asterisk 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 asterisk, right above the bed. Alisa was incredulous when she learned Trevor had convinced Arden to take part. The family once so broken is whole again. The healing, says Alisa, is a process and ongoing. Alisa Mathewson, we've already come so far. Alisa now hopes to raise awareness of domestic abuse, sharing her experience and recovery with other victims, and she works full-time as an insurance agent. What she does not do is dwell on Trevor Summers. Alisa Mathewson. I've been dealing with him since I was 19 years old. That man means nothing to me, and I'm moving forward with my life. Alisa Mathewson. We have the life more than I've ever envisioned us to have now. Jeff Mathewson. We're on the road to kids' happiness. Bryn Summers. A healed family. Alisa Mathewson. This is a happy ending. This is a happy story.